Good morning. It's exactly 8:15 at News Talk 99.7 WNTK, WNTK.com, News Talk 98.9 and 1490 WUVR. As we present presidential candidates to you right here on the WNTK Morning Show, your opportunity to learn more from them, ask them questions. Congressman Ron Paul, welcoming him back to our WNTK microphones. Congressman Paul, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Doing well, thank you.
It's good to have you. First of all, let me just ask you something really quickly, and we'll get this out of the way. The look on your face when you looked to your right and saw Governor Perry get stuck the other night in the debate when he talked about the agencies that he would cut, what was the first thing that went through your mind when you saw that happening in front of your eyes?
Well, the very first thing when he says he had three agencies or three departments that he wanted to cut, my immediate reaction, well, but I've had five, So I sort of looked to him and held up five fingers, and said, we need five, not three. But then when he started stumbling, then the instinct was, I think, a natural instinct for so many of us. And when people, have a slip, when they can't think of a word, I wanted to help them. so I started, I named HUD. I said, say HUD, something like that. But it was sort of a natural instinct. It wasn't in any way a political instinct because it happened so quickly.
Yeah, it was certainly one of those moments that will live in history. When you talk about help, let's talk about helping people get back to work. You had job fairs. You were at a job fair yesterday in Manchester and up in the North Country in Berlin, where they have always had high unemployment up in Coos County, despite our relatively low unemployment here in New Hampshire. When you're looking these Granite Staters right in the eye, what are they asking you about getting them back to work?
Well, they want to know how it happened and what to do about it. And there's the narrow picture. Why does one city or one town or one county have problems? And sometimes they are local issues. But then the other thing that I talk more about is, the big picture of why the country's in trouble. If the country's in trouble, then it brings about some of these areas, for special areas that get into more trouble. So I've talked generally about why the anticipated slump and the financial bubbles have occurred, and why we shouldn't be surprised, and what we have to do to correct those. And then the jobs become available and should help us all, but it doesn't solve every single problem in every single town that has problems because of special events, or even in some states. Some states, make it more difficult to have jobs, and that's why so many jobs have left, the Rust Belt and have gone south. Texas happens to be a pretty healthy area for jobs, and a lot of jobs come down there. But some states, like in Ohio and Wisconsin and Michigan, but they're in a terrible mess. But they have local laws and labor laws that make things much worse.
So how does government create jobs? Because very often the criticism is like, well, yeah, those guys say they're going to make jobs, but how does the government create jobs?
Well, they don't. If you literally want government to make jobs, they make bad jobs. They make bureaucratic jobs, where the bureaucrats actually interfere with real jobs because they overregulate and they cause overtaxation, and then of course it causes a lot of malinvestment when the government, through the Federal Reserve, creates excessive credit. They cause too many mistakes to be made. But the responsibility of the government is to create an environment where people who are energetic and understand, anticipate, and take risks and start new businesses, that's the role of the government. But to literally say government has to create jobs, they'll just cause more problems because we've had too much government directing the capital flow and where it should go and what interest rates should be. So there's been way too much meddling in the economy. So you want to get the government out of the way so that we can invite our companies and the capital come back in this country. But right now we've done everything to discourage that, and it's much better now. Sometimes the jobs go south, but sometimes there's not even an incentive to go south, then they leave our country. But this is not a reflection that they're so much better than us. It's that we mess up the climate in this country. We overtax and overregulate, and then we chase our jobs away.
Congressman Ron Paul, our guest this morning on this Veterans Day at WNTK. Speaking of jobs, we just had Newt Gingrich on the air, and on this Veterans Day, with returning veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq at an unemployment rate of 14 and 15%, given the training, the amazing training they get in our armed forces, that number is staggering, and it is disappointing, to say the least. How do you get these veterans back into the workforce?
Well, the veterans are like all other people, and if you had a healthy climate, they're going, and especially if they have training, the people will be begging for it. Even under today's circumstances, businesses are looking for trained personnel, and we don't have that. So there's been so much gross distortion of our economic system. You know, the other extreme of people returning from war is what happened after World War II. 10 million came home, and there were no jobs program. Matter of fact, the government slashed spending by 60%. Taxes went way down, and by that time, the malinvestment of the 30s and the 20s, the Depression was finally over. And they absorbed 10 million essentially. So it's the climate that makes the difference. And right now we have a very unhealthy climate for jobs. So we have to address that major factor.
Let's talk about cutting government, because a number of the Republican candidates talk about cutting government. You just mentioned the agencies that you would cut. Here's a question that former House Speaker Newt Gingrich wanted us to ask you because he knew you were coming on, and here's the question.
You might ask him why it's been so hard to get auditing the Federal Reserve accomplished. I've come out strongly in support of his position on auditing the Federal Reserve, and yet in Washington it's almost a forbidden topic.
You've been on the Hill for 30-plus years. Why is it a forbidden topic, and why is it so hard?
Well, it's been difficult. One thing is not too many people understood the Fed, and they always thought the Fed created prosperity and kept us and got us out of recessions. And the opposite is true. They create the bubbles and then the recessions. And it's only become known in 2008 that the Federal Reserve is significant in causing these problems. So the environment has changed, and we have gotten more information than ever before in these last several years. But he is right. We have not had a full audit. I'm glad he's on our side on that, and he's been doing a good job of bringing that subject up. But I think the special interests don't want to hear about it, because during the crisis of 2008, the Fed created $15 trillion worth of credit that they injected into the economy. We have no oversight. We don't know who exactly they bailed out. We did find out that $5 trillion went overseas to foreign banks and foreign central banks. But the people who get these benefits don't want to know, and behind the scenes they have a lot of control over the Fed, and they've argued that they've had to be secret forever. But I think that is changing because their system is falling apart. This financial system cannot continue, and we will have to have monetary reform, and we will have to seriously address the role of the Federal Reserve.
Congressman Ron Paul, our guest this morning at 8:23 on WNTK WUVR. Congressman, if you will, let us move on to foreign policy. While the emphasis has been on jobs and the economy, not many candidates are talking about foreign policy. Earlier this morning, we were speaking with our Jerusalem Bureau and talking about the Israeli-Iran relationship, or lack thereof, and the powder keg that's there in the Middle East. What should the United States' role be in Israel and a nuclear Iran?
Well, we should do whatever we can, to stop the increase in the supply of nuclear weapons around the world, and it would be to nobody's advantage for the Iranians to have a nuclear weapon. But to say that because they might get one day and have our country overreact and say that we have to use military force, I think is a total disaster. Just think of how the war drums were beaten, during the lead up to the Iraq War. It was always said that they had weapons of mass destruction and the Al-Qaeda was there. It was all not true. And just look how many people have suffered the consequence of this. And because these wars that we get into carelessly, we've added $4 trillion worth of debt in these last 10 years. So I would say step back and think about it. Right now, there is no concrete evidence that the Iranians are on the verge of a nuclear weapon. They have not been charged with breaking the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So, yes, we should do what we can. Matter of fact, through diplomacy, we got the Libyans to give up on their nuclear program, and look at what happened to them. They were then, that allowed, the Allies then to go in there and get rid of him. So there's an incentive for other countries to say, hey, if I have a nuke, maybe they won't come in and destroy me. See, we don't go in and invade North Korea, and they have a nuclear weapon, and they can be dangerous. But, no, there's a lot of respect, when you have a nuclear weapon. And besides, we confronted the Soviets when they had 30,000 of these, and they were off our shore. So I would say my major issue is be a little cautious. Don't look for another war. We can't afford it, and who knows what the unintended consequences might be of bombing and going into Iran. So I think it's a very dangerous idea.
Congressman Ron Paul at 825. You have a great deal of traction here in the state of New Hampshire. Your poll numbers are pretty strong across the United States of America. The other night on Sean Hannity, Senator John McCain suggested perhaps a third party will emerge. Whether or not it happens this year, I don't know. Will you take your strength out of the primaries and the caucuses and challenge the Republican and the Democratic candidates as a third-party candidate?
That's not going to happen. And besides, I'm in the middle of a race where we keep doing better, and the others are sort of stumbling a little bit, so that would be a foolish thought. And the two states where we do the best are the two early states where we've done the most work, and that's in Iowa, here in New Hampshire. So we're very pleased with our position right now.
Congressman Ron Paul, appreciate the time online at ronpaul.com. Congressman, thank you. Look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks a lot.